Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this important discussion of Islam, race, and COVID-19. I want to thank all of the organizers at Boston University for bringing everyone together. I want to thank my co-panelists, and of course, again, I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. What I want to do today, briefly in this introduction, and hopefully we'll get a chance to delve more into this in the question and answer period. I'll be joining you live very shortly, is to begin to offer a way, an introduction, a framing introduction in order to help us think through what we've been seeing over the last several months a little bit more clearly. And what I want to do is to offer some clarifying thoughts on what I think is at the root of the problem, and that is, of course, the problem of white supremacy. I think when you ask most people, and this is something that I've done in classes and classrooms and with other audiences, is when I ask people, to identify what they understand white supremacy to be, a lot of times what people tend to offer are, images or ideas about extremist groups such as the KKK, cross burnings, that sort of thing. But also, and this is particularly true with a lot of my students, is that when we begin discussions about white supremacy, a lot of times it centers around or racism in general, it centers around the questions of feelings, feeling that you're superior to, if you're a member of the favored race, if you're white in this case, feeling that you're superior to another human being, or if you are the target of these ideas, maybe feeling inferior. And of course, these things I think are important aspects of what white supremacy and racism is and are and what they do. But also it's a very incomplete picture of what's going on here. And I think a more complete or more robust definition will help us to understand some of what we've been seeing over the last several months in relationship to the pandemic. And what do I mean by that? So the way I understand white supremacy is that I understand it to be a structuring ideology, a totalizing structuring ideology that organizes in a very complete and extensive way the ways that power is organized and the ways that resources are allocated. So white supremacy, for example, historically in the United States has dictated where you can live, um, where you can go to school, whether you can go to school, what type of educational experience that you will have when you are there, if you are there at all. It also dictates where you can reside, where you cannot reside, what types of housing and shelter that you have access to. It dictates where you can work. It dictates, how you'll be present in the political process. Will you be present in the political process as an agentive, active subject, or will you be participating or present in the various political processes around you as an object, right? As a passive, sort of presence that actually isn't, that isn't really able, as an individual or as a collective, to organize and mobilize life-saving and life-enhancing resources for the good of your families and for the good of your communities. And so this is what we are dealing with here. And it also, importantly, particularly within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, white supremacy dictates whether or not you live or die. And so the stakes here are literally life and death. And I think it's important to really understand this in a complete and robust way in order to help us think about the patterns that we've been seeing, why they're there, and why they continue to unfold in the ways that they have. And what do I mean? What patterns am I talking about here? I'm talking about, there's been a lot of discussion in the last several months about the ways that communities of color, Black people and other communities of color have been negatively impacted. Some very brief statistics to help us to understand what we're looking at here. As of August 2020, according to data collected by states reporting their statistics across the United States, the death rate Black people account for more cases and more deaths from coronavirus as of August 2020 in 30 of the 49 states that have reported data. More cases in 30 of the 49 states, more deaths in 34 of 44 reporting states that are actually collecting data on coronavirus deaths and race. This is also true and to some extent with other communities of color, including Latinx communities. It is also true, that Native populations across the US are experiencing and have been experiencing tremendously disproportionate rates of infection and death. And so in this case, what's happening, what you see is what I emphasized just a minute ago, is that white supremacy literally determines through its allocation of resources that prioritize white life above all others, literally determining whether or not people live or die. This is, of course, was entirely predictable. If you understand this about, the U.S., if you understand that this is the organizing grammar of the United States, these outcomes were entirely predictable ahead of time. Even back in March or April, when we just started to get a sense that something was about to happen, and there was a lot of unanswered questions about what that was and how it would unfold. I think it was pretty clear to a lot of us in the very beginning that we knew that those who are already made vulnerable because of the way that white supremacy operates were going to be even more vulnerable. And not just because of higher rates of certain pre-existing medical conditions, but also, of course, due to disproportionate representation among essential workers, workers who don't have the luxury of staying home and staying more strictly quarantined due to unequal access to healthcare, and of course, in this pandemic, that's played out in, in some instances, unequal access to testing, et cetera, but also, disproportionate representation in prisons, et cetera. And so, Muslim communities and many in Muslim communities, to sort of bring this to the last the last component of my opening remarks here, there are many in the Muslim community who have known, because we come from these communities, particularly, and here I want to place some emphasis in my remarks on the organizing efforts of Black Muslim organizations under the conditions of this pandemic, because we know already that many of our communities, because we come from these communities, right, we know the ways that the patterns of white supremacy typically impact us, right? And so what happened, and what I want to draw some attention to, and hopefully we get a chance to talk more about this in the Q&A, in the discussion part of today's proceedings, you had existing Muslim organizations and workers who are already involved in providing care and consistently dealing with the negative impact and the fallout of white supremacy, racism, but also particularly as it relates to Muslim communities, a particular brand of racism and white supremacist activity that impacts Muslim communities very specifically, of course, is Islamophobia that acts in tandem with anti-Blackness and other forms of white supremacist ideology. And so I want to talk about very briefly the efforts of what came to be known as the Black Muslim COVID Coalition. It was a rapid response committee formed, sort of on the fly, but also very deliberately building upon existing networks of care and advocacy that already existed in Black Muslim communities to help help people to navigate these conditions even when there isn't a pandemic. So two primary anchoring organizations, Muslim Wellness Foundation, which is a mental health and emotional wellness organization that's devoted to increasing awareness and advocacy around issues of mental health and emotional well-being, and Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, a long-standing organization that has a tremendous track record of anti-racism education and advocacy, sort of combined efforts to begin to pull together a wider network of a national network of Black Muslim activists, imams, physicians, and other healthcare workers, sociologists, anthropologists, artists, community workers of various types, organizers to help Black Muslim communities to really navigate the storm or the tsunami that we knew was coming, right? Because we understand the way that white supremacy works to marginalize our communities, in many cases, at the cost of our lives. And so the idea here is that, and these organizations in part function as a result of not just this idea that our own lives are at stake and out of a concern for self-interest in a very narrow sort of way, but also as a part of a greater religious or spiritual mandate to take care of the vulnerable, to fight oppression, right? And these are very, very much understood to be Quranic commands that I think animate and motivate a lot of the organizing that has been taking place over the, in the sort of the immediate crisis moment, but also going back a lot longer. And these, and I think, a lot of what's kind of, I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, but I think one of the things that's compelling here also is that I think these organizations arise and exist within a longer tradition of Black Muslim activism that has understood the amelioration of adverse material conditions due to racism and discrimination as a spiritual imperative and a part of what they must do as ethical human beings in the world. And so I want to stop there because I don't have a lot of time to sort of say a lot that needs to be said here. But I want to sort of close here, and I look forward to discussing some of this further with you in the Q&A. Thank you.